Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Deuce Plays. I am your host, Bart Hanson, and today's episode for December 12th, for December 27th, 2011, the last episode of 2011 is CBets. As always, you can email the show at deuceplays@deucescrack.com. Check out the forums over in the homepage in the podcast section, and you can follow my Twitter at Bart Hanson, as I send out daily strategy tips that will improve your live no-limit poker game, and sometimes I'll send out tweets about mixed games. And, of course, if you want to check out live videos that are similar to what I did on the DC series Poker With Your Pants On, you can go to crushlivepoker.com, and you can see live training videos, live poker training over live poker right there. I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year coming up. I'm actually recording this episode in advance because I'm going back to Boston for Christmas time. But as we come back on Live at the Bike the next couple weeks, we're going to be doing a lot of tournaments because the World Series of Poker circuit event is in town. So if you're interested in watching, final tables of unedited tournaments, you can check that out. I think it's basically going almost every single night, starting at like 6 or 7 Pacific time. I'm going to be playing in a lot of no-limit tournaments over the summer at the World Series, so I'm going to be concentrating and trying to improve my no-limit tournament game. The frustrating part for a cash game player in no-limit tournaments, especially the smaller tournaments at the World Series, and I'm talking about like those $1,000 ones and those $1,500 ones, is, and especially the topic that we're going to cover today, c-betting, you're so inherently short that you can't do some of the things that I talk about in this show to basically increase your win rate as a cash game player. In tournaments you have to play kind of tight. There isn't a whole lot of room for double and triple barreling. You can get thin value because a lot of other people play so much pot control. But, if you lose one pot, now you're in a situation where you're down to like 30 or 40 big blinds. And obviously the pre-flop hand selection stuff is different. Suited cards are almost irrelevant under 30 big blinds, and that's a mistake that I make a lot. Calling raises with Jack-10 suited, probably not going to be good, even to like a 2.5 or a 3x raise, when you're only 30 big blinds deep, just because, first of all, you're never going to have full equity against top pair. Forget about an overpair. So, you need to flop 2-pair. You get yourself into a spot where, if you miss your draw, you lose. And tournaments, it's almost like more like playing a little bit like limit poker in the sense that top pair is the nuts, 1 pair is the nuts, things like that. But so that's going to be all on the Live at the Bike coming up in January, World Series of Poker circuit events. And I'm probably going to play the main event, which is a $1,500 no limit, and I'm going to approach the World Series differently this year, where I'm not going to play as many mixed events. I'm just going to be playing no limit events because I've been playing a ton of no limit. Between Crush Live Poker and Deuce Plays Premium, I've been working like crazy. I found a couple games where I feel I've got a gigantic edge in these specific games that I'm playing in no limit. So, I'm going to play them basically until the money dries out. And, work. So anyways, this episode is called CBets, and the reason why I bring this up is because I actually got 2 emails independently, one from Dan D and one from Aaron R, over the same week last week, asking me to do an episode about c-betting. So the first email comes from Aaron R, and he says, "I'd love to hear a show dedicated to a comprehensive look at c-bets. Obviously, it's a topic you touch on in almost every show, but I still feel that I'm a little lost on certain board textures, especially when out of position or against multiple opponents. When is a check as good as a c-bet?" And that's a question about delayed c-betting. What about c-betting into a short stack? That's another good question. It just seems to me it's such an important issue that any improvement in that part of the game would show immediate results in a win rate. After all, knowing how to deal with a river check raise is great, but that only happens once or twice a session. Whether and how much to c-bet is about the most common decision making thing you make besides knowing what cards to start with pre-flop. And I think that's a really good point. I think that that's true. I think that c-betting probably is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, part of one's game. And c-betting correctly and when knowing when a delayed c-bet is as good as an initial c-bet, and knowing when to follow up a c-bet with a double barrel as a bluff, what types of boards to continue to betting for value, etc., etc. The email from Dan D says, listen to an old podcast with Improv, and he mentioned changing your c-bet amounts based on position. He briefly said to notice this, but didn't go into it further. Why would you change your c-bet amounts based upon position? You also mentioned in your podcast to notice the right c-betting texture, which I believe is that you want to c-bet dry boards, but I think more of that, does your board match my perceived range, even if it is wet, like Queen 10 8 2 suit? Since Queen and 10 are good matches for my perceived range, perhaps you could do a podcast on c-betting, and that comes from Dan D, and I'm going to get into all these questions here right now. Just a little bit of basics, and again, I've gone over, I do touch on c-betting and textures pretty much every single episode. When I talk about, and I really believe this, and I'm going to be mentioning it more and more, what are the best boards to c-bet? And it becomes a question of sometimes heads up and sometimes multi-way. But let's talk about three-handed, which I think is kind of bread and butter for c-betting, because at three-handed is a spot where you're going to c-bet good textured boards, and it's really important to recognize your image, because I've talked about this, matching what your image is with how good the board is to c-bet. And the way that I do this mentally is, like, say for example, and I will go over what I think are the top, when I use these percentages of boards, but let's say for example, a board comes out where I feel like it's a top 80% c-betting board. And what I mean by that is that it's going to beat 8 out of every 10 boards for c-betting. So it's in the top 20%, basically, in terms of good c-betting boards. When am I going to c-bet and when am I going to not c-bet? Obviously, if I had a totally neutral image, I'm going to c-bet 80% of the time, into this board. Or actually, if I had the way that I do this is, like, if I had a neutral image, I'm going to c-bet probably 100% into a top 80% board. Where I come up with these numbers is, let's say that my image is in the worst 20%. What I mean is that, like, you take a random sample of my play in a random session, and I say right now my image is probably going to be worse than 8 out of 10 random samples that you're going to take, at any given time. So my image is in the bottom 20% randomly. Now, if I see a board that is in basically the top 80%, I might not choose. That might be the cutoff for me. I might not choose to c-bet this type of board, whereas normally I would c-bet it 8 out of 10 times, because my image is so bad. My image is only going to be good, 2 out of 10 times, or my image right now is a 2 rated out of a 10, and the c-betting board is an 8 out of a 10. At that point, it's pretty close whether or not that I would c-bet. But let's say, for example, my image is a 1.5 out of 10, and the c-betting board is an 8 out of 10. Well, that might be a spot where I don't c-bet. And I don't mean to confuse you guys, but let's say, for example, we get a c-betting board where I would rank it, say, like 5 out of 10. It's probably like neutral EV. It's even. It's not in the worst boards, but it's not in the best boards. It's literally right in the middle. You could count 5 out of 10 boards that would be better to c-bet. And let's say that my image is really good. I've got an image of 7 out of 10. Well, then I'm going to c-bet that board. Now, let's say that my image is a little bit below average. It's a 3 out of 10. Well, then I'm probably not going to c-bet that board. Now, obviously, these are really, really arbitrary numbers, and you can't come up with, a mathematical formula to necessarily determine what percentage a specific board is in terms of c-betting. Well, actually, you probably could come up with a mathematical number to figure out what are the top boards of c-betting. I mean, it would depend on what type of criteria you would use. But you can obviously, trying to rate your image is going to be somewhat subjective. But sometimes, you might have the absolute worst image in the world where, you would rate it as a 1 out of 10. And you might get one of the best boards to c-bet, like a 9 out of 10. And you choose not to c-bet that board because your image is so bad. So that's when I really determine whether I'm going to, c-bet or not. It depends on my image. And coming into a game where I have no image, then I'm going to c-bet, like I said, like if the board's 8 out of 10, then I'm going to c-bet that 100% of the time. If the board's 6 out of 10, I'm going to c-bet that. Now, you're going to have some image from prior sessions if you're playing with regulars and stuff. So normally you're never going to come into a game without any image, and you have to realize the type of image that you have. Now, I always say that image is really not looseness or tightness, it's winning and losing. So you could be a lag player, feel like you have a loose image, come into a game and say, okay, well, what's my perceived image here? Even though I haven't played any hands, I've got a lag image. But because you're a big winner, I still think that you probably have an above average image, and you still should c-bet, the boards that are above a rate of 4 or 5, something like that. So the only times that you're going to come into a table with basically no image at all is, if you're playing versus just total unknowns, like say you go to the World Series or something and you hop in, one of the 15 2-5 no limit games or 5-10 games, and no one knows you at all. In that particular scenario, if you're a younger guy, you could make the case where a little bit of the looseness versus the tightness comes into play with the image as opposed to the winning versus losing. Because I think in a lot of old guys' heads, they're like, oh, this is this young punk. He's going to be betting any boards and stuff like that. So so that could sometimes work against you, against your image as an unknown, where, if you're a younger guy, you actually might start off with a neutral, like 4 out of 10 image, just because people aren't going to be giving you any credit. Now, if you're an older guy listening to this, you might come in with a 6 or a 7 unknown image. Again, very, very subjective. There's no right answer to it, but you can see kind of where you're going. And that's how I match up how I c-bet and when to c-bet and things like that. Now, what are the types of boards that I consider, 8s out of 10s, 9s out of 10s, 1 and 2 out of 10? And again, we've gone over this a lot, but, just really simply, the boards that are high, with one high card, and actually the boards that are high to medium, low, with no flush draw and no connectivity, usually are the ones that are basically like 9s out of 10s or 10s out of 10s. I mean, people think, well, King 7 deuce is a great board to c-bet, and it is. But I'll actually take 9 deuce 3 and 10 deuce 3 and even 8 deuce 3 rainbow over like a King 7 deuce board almost all the time. And of course, the reason for that is because of the fact that you can fire multiple barrels, and unless a guy flops a set, it's going to be very, very difficult for a hand like even 8-9 on a 9 deuce 3 board to continue, pocket 7s on a 9 deuce 3 board to continue, things like that. So if you're only going to fire one barrel, then I would probably say that the high, low with no connectivity and no flush draws are the best boards to c-bet. Queen 7 deuce, King 7 deuce, Ace 7 deuce. But for our purposes, in deeper stacks cash games, I would prefer to see medium-high boards like 9 deuce 3 and 10 deuce 3. So it's kind of the same thing in tournaments, because normally you're not going to be firing multiple barrels. You probably would rather see King 7 deuce, things like that. But anyway, so the 9 out of 10 board is like the 9 deuce 3, the 10 deuce 3, and then I would say probably, right around there are the high, medium, low boards like Ace 7 deuce, King 7 deuce, rainbow, things like that. Those are the 8s and the 9s. Any board that's going to be rainbow is going to be a better board than a board that's going to have a 2 flush in it. And any board that's totally unconnected is normally going to be better than a board that has some sort of straight draw, with that exception of the 9 deuce 3 and the 10 deuce 3. So obviously, like, 9 deuce 3 is better than like 9 4 5. 9 deuce 3 is a little better than 9-3-4, although I like 9-3-4 too. 9-3-4 with a 2 suit, that starts to like go into the range of like maybe 6 or 7 out of 10. King 3-4 with a 2 suit, that's probably like a 7 or an 8. And again, like I'm just kind of making this stuff up, but I hope that you can see, where I'm going with it. Even high, medium, low with a 2 suit, it's always going to be like in the top, 50%. I think that normally, unless the board is not 2 suit and connected basically with Broadway, an ace high or a king high board is almost always going to be in the top 50%. Like king, queen, 4, 2 suit, like that's probably like 60 or 70%. I mean, yeah, there's their ability to have straight draws up there. But unless you like run into a board of like ace, king, 10 with a 2 suit and you've got no equity, say you're aced with like 6, 7, and you've got 3 or 4 people, that's probably not going to be one that I'm going to, barrel into as a bluff because it just hits so much, hits so many things, and people can call so much. Now, it does hit our perceived range. Now, the example that Dan D gave with the queen 10-8 with a 2 suit, yeah, that can hit our perceived range, but, it's one of these things where at the same time, a lot of jack 10s, 9-10s and stuff are going to call us. It's a 2 suit board. I don't think that that's one of the best boards to c-bet at all. I would say it's probably like a 3 out of 10, something like that, in terms of, c-betting against, multiple opponents. Even when you get down to heads up, obviously heads up is a little bit different, and you can increase your c-betting heads up because you're only against one player. But that's actually where delayed c-betting comes into play as well, and we'll get to that in a second. And you can also delayed c-bet into usually like 2 or 3 people as well. And then like basically on the flip side, you can have boards that are so good, that are so ripe for c-betting, and again, paired boards, like say for example, the board comes out like 9 deuce deuce. That's going to be in the top 80 or 90%, in a multi-weight pot, and even heads up. And sometimes it's such a good board to c-bet heads up 9 deuce deuce that you do even check back your like ace high hands, like ace queen and stuff, because you just feel that your hand has such good showdown value, and you also dominate some of your opponent's range that you don't mind him catching up if you catch, for example, catch an ace or a queen with ace queen and he's got a dominated hand. You actually get a couple more streets of value. And I've actually gone back and forth with this concept because really it becomes the question of, well, if you check back ace jack or ace queen on a 9 deuce deuce board and the guy's got a hand like 5-6 and he's just going to fold, do you need to protect your equity in the hand? And I think that that's kind of where you would c-bet into multi-way opponents on a 9 deuce deuce board. First of all, to get them off of a hand like pocket 4s. And also, you want to protect your equity against the hand because now if you've got 2 players with unpaired cards, you actually have to dodge 4 cards on the turn and on the river. And also the pot is bigger when you're dealing with multi-way opponents. So that's why you want to make that bet with ace queen, ace jack, even if it's the best hand on a 9 deuce deuce board versus more than one player. Now versus one player, again, I think it's a little bit closer than I used to think. I used to always think it's just a check back. But now I can definitely see the merit in protecting one's equity in the hand, but the pot is smaller, inherently because we're heads up. And there's obviously less cards that are going to hurt your hand just because you're dealing with one opponent. Now, I talked a little bit about a really quick hand at the end of the episode from last week where I raised with ace jack and the board came out 10, 10, 3, and the guy checked and I checked it back, and now the turn was a 10 and he checked again. And at that point, I just knew that there was just no way that he had a pair. I just, the read that I got, and I thought that my hand was basically best like 95% of the time, but if I bet here, he's just going to fold. So why should I check back? Especially now when if an ace comes, we make the same hand, right? Because the board's 10, 10, 3 and the turn's a 10, so it's not like I can get value from like ace 8 because my kicker's not going to play. Or the same thing if he's dominated with a jack. So I didn't really see any inherent value in checking that back. I actually just wanted him to I actually wanted to protect my equity in the hand. I just wanted him to fold, his unpaired, whatever he had, his unpaired cards. So, that gives you a little bit of sense of where I'm going in terms of the CBets. I mean, the worst boards to CBet, I think, are the ones where, especially even if you're heads up, but especially in multi-way action, say the board comes out like 8-7-6 monotone. I mean, that would probably be like a 1% board, or, in the worst 5% board. 8-7-6 monotone. Even 8-7-6 two suit against 3 or 4 people. C-betting those types of boards are just really burning money with high unpaired cards. Now, I guess you could make a case where you could just fire multiple barrels and get them off of an 8, but I'm not in the business of doing that type of thing. A pair and a straight draw. I always talk about, we went into depth about this last week, about how I feel that live players get emotionally invested in the pot. The more money they put in the pot on the flop and the turn, the harder it is for them to fold on the river. So I don't, and that's why I like to bluff raise early if I'm going to bluff raise, and that's why I don't like to double barrel on some turns where I feel like they've picked up a straight draw on a pair, and the board's not really all that scary. There might only be one overcard, because I just feel in my experience that it's harder for them to release on the river. So again, we've got the top C-bet boards, which is high, low, low, offsuit, or medium strength to high, low, low, offsuit. Then the ones that are like 60-70%, which is like high, medium, low, maybe with a 2 suit, or high, high, low with a 2 suit. Right around 50 might be a board like, Jack 10-6, Rainbow, something like that, against 3 people. And then as you get further and further down, it becomes rags, and the rags that are connected, and then the rags that are connected with 2 suits and 3 suits are the worst. And again, you want to tag your image basically to a rating, or this is how I do it. You can do whatever you want, but this is how I do it. And it's kind of subconsciously. I give myself an image rating on a scale of 1 to 10. I try to give the board texture a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. And if my image is higher than the rating of the board texture, then I'm going to, if the board texture rating, let me see if I can put this into words. Sorry about this. If the board texture percentage is, for example, 80%, then whenever my image rating is a 2 or higher, when the board texture rating is 8, then whenever my image rating is a 2 or higher, I'm going to bet. If the board texture is a 5, whenever my image rating of 5 or higher, I'm going to bet. So I guess you could probably say then that if the 2 ratings add up to a 10 or more, then I'm going to bet, right? So if the texture is a 3 and my image is a 7, I'm going to bet. If the texture is a 4 and my image is a 5, I'm not going to bet. If the texture is an 8.5 and my image is a 1, I'm not going to bet. There we go. There's a little mathematical for you. If the 2 ratings add up to 10 or higher, then I'm going to bet. And obviously, like I said, you're not going to be doing this in your head thinking this, but that's kind of, the line that I'm thinking of when I think about making a C-bet. When is a check as good as a C-bet? Talking about delayed C-betting. Now, we just talked about that hand where the board came out Queen 10-8 with a 2 suit. And against a tight player, I think that Queen 10-8 might not necessarily be the best example, but especially if you're in your position, or even if you're out of position, and you can do this in 3-bet pots as well, especially against really tight players. If you get a board that's really dry, like in the top 7 or 8, 7, 8, 9 rating in terms of C-betting, if the guy plays so fit or fold, you actually don't necessarily need to C-bet the flop. So what I'm talking about is, say the board is Queen 7 deuce, Rainbow. The guy checks to you. And let's say that you've got no equity. You've got like 4 or 5 suited. If you know that the guy will come and bet a queen on the turn, and if he doesn't have a queen, he'll check and he'll just fold the turn, then there's really no reason to C-bet here. You can just check it back, and then if the guy checks to you on the turn, you can just bet, And if the guy bets the turn, you can just fold. And it's, I mean, it's not an absolute thing because sometimes a guy might come out and bet a medium strength hand that he might have folded on the flop, but at least he still has something. Because sometimes he still might call you with that hand, like, hey, pocket eights on a queen seven deuce board, you check it back and then he bets. But the point is that you're basically gain information by just what he does on the turn. And this is really for players that really are incapable of coming out and bluffing the turn. But you can make this play in or out of position. You could do the same thing where you could, be a pre-flop raiser from up front. This tight guy calls you, the board comes out queen seven deuce. You check, he checks, and then you just bet the turn. Now, sometimes that's not going to be as much information from out of position. I mean, the delayed c-bet from out of position isn't going to work as well because he could be checking back sixes or nines here, where he's checking back and, he thinks he's induced to bluff and he's just going to call your bet. Obviously, it works a lot better in position because once he's checked the second time, you've got the positional advantage. You've seen him act twice. When you are out of position, obviously, you've only seen him act one time. So in that case, we've got the more information, obviously when we're in position. You can also make that play in 3-bet pots as well. Now, in 3-bet pots, I actually look at it a little bit differently in the sense that unless the guy is slow playing a monster, I think almost delayed c-betting can be more useful from out of position in the sense that in a 3-bet pot, which most recreational players will definitely play straightforward, when you're in position, if you check back the flop, let's say that, guy raised and you re-raised with ace-x and the guy called with pocket nines and the board came out like queen seven deuce. If you check back that flop, you actually might get nines to look you up now on later streets in a 3-bet pot. Whereas from out of position, playing a delayed c-bet, like say you squeezed and a guy called and you check and he checks it back, because so many people see a guy in your spot from up front, like check a monster there, unless they have the monster like top set, you can sometimes just bet out the turn. You can just check fold the flop, and if they check it back, just kind of bet out the turn. And I think that because the pot is bigger, they tend to get scared. And this might not be a 100% absolute thing, but I think that sometimes that delayed c-betting in 3-bet pots from out of position is a lot more useful than trying to make delayed c-bets from out of position in single-raised pots. And I think it's close whether a delayed c-bet from out of position in a 3-bet pot may be better or worse than a delayed c-bet from in position in a 3-bet pot. And obviously those are the reasons, why. One of the other things, too, in multi-way pots that you can do as a delayed c-bet, and this was a hand that I played, I think yesterday, where I raised to 35 with 8-9 of diamonds, and I got 2 callers, and the board came out, and I was in the middle. I got a guy in position to call me and a guy in the blind called me, and the board came out king, queen, 5 with 2 clubs. Now, where would I rate that board in terms of c-betting against three people? And I think that these ratings sometimes change heads up versus 3 people, because I think that heads up, that rating's going to be higher. That might be like in the 70%, especially against a limper or a guy in the blinds that called. That the limper might having a pocket pair. That's going to hit your range. Against 3 people, that might be only a 4 and a 5. Against one person, that might be like a 7. But here I decided to check. My image wasn't great. It was close. I didn't have really any equity whatsoever with my 8-9. Guy checked, I checked, and the guy behind checked. Now the turn was an offsuit king. So it was king, queen, 5 with 2 clubs. Turn was an offsuit king. Now the guy from up front checked again. Now that gives a lot of information here. And I wasn't even planning on necessarily making a delayed c-bet on this board. But you can end up making delayed c-bets on boards where the cards and the action dictates it. Basically what I mean here is that once the guy in late position doesn't bet the flop, and he's a pretty straightforward player, he's probably going to bet a king. And now the king pairs on the turn. Now, obviously, the guy from up front. So it goes check through on the flop. We don't really have any information about the guy from up front because, again, like I said, people fall into that mold where they checked the razor almost 90-95% of the time. So his check means nothing. But the check behind on the king queen 5 2 flush board usually is going to mean that the guy from behind is at least not going to have a king, and he might even bet a queen. So when he doesn't bet, we don't think that he has much. And now when the turn pairs the king, now the upfront guy checks again. And you will find that most guys from up front will bet even at least a queen here, and they'll definitely bet a king. Now, obviously, they could be slow playing something. So when that upfront guy checks, and coupled with the fact that the guy in position checked the flop, I think that it's just ripe to come out and bet here. So I think that the point being made is that you can sometimes find delayed c-bets when you've just given up on the pot as the preflop raiser, especially when it gets checked around and you are in the middle, and then the top card pairs and the guy from up front checks. Because like I said, the guy from in position isn't going to have anything strong, and the guy from up front normally isn't going to have anything strong. So you can just bet and then just take it down. I mean, one of the other things that you can do, too, on delayed c-bets is, say you raised and the board came out like ace-7-3, 2-suit. Say you had like jack-10 of diamonds and it was against 4 opponents, and you said, you know what, I'm not going to bet here because it's too many people. And again, I talk about that the rating goes down. Ace-7-3, 2-suit heads up might be an 8, but an ace-7-3, 2-suit against 4 people might be only a 2 or a 3. I mean, you're going to be hard-pressed to get into a situation where you ever get into a spot where the board's like a 6 or a 7 against more than 3 people. Just because it's just not going to get through that much. It's not going to be... you're going to have a really, really, really good image. Say, for example, you try to c-bet bluff against 4 opponents, right? Well, probably the board that might be the absolute best would be like a hand like queen, deuce, deuce, rainbow. Okay, but even then, against multiple opponents, or jack, deuce, deuce, rainbow, they're going to either have a jack or nothing. But even then, against multiple opponents, that board might only be a 5. So you're going to have an image of more than a 5 to make that c-bet. Or you could even say that board's a 4, so you're going to have an image of more than 6, for that to be a c-bet. But so I had jack-10, the board came out ace-7-3, and it got checked through, and then the turn was like an offsuit 9. Now, let's say, for example, I was second to last to act there. The pre-flop, the guy in position didn't bet. Now the turn was a 9, and then the 2 people from up front checked me again. Now, I picked up a gut shot, but that's inconsequential, even if say, for example, the board had paired a 3. Once again, with the people not coming out and betting from up front and that guy not betting in position, I think that you can turn the hands that you have chosen not to c-bet, even if you were not planning to make a delayed c-bet. You can turn those hands into delayed c-bets if you are in the middle. If you are in the middle with guys behind you that have checked on the flop and guys from up front that have checked on the turn into delayed c-bet bluffs. And I don't think that is something that I've actually talked about, but it's definitely something that I have kind of figured out here in the last few months. What about c-betting into short stacks? Tend not to ISO short stacks, so you'll also delayed c-bet them as well. He's asking me a question. Yeah, I think that it's very, very important for you to recognize stack size. Very important for you to recognize stack size and to recognize the fact that I will definitely over-limp some smaller stacks. Like if it goes limp and then 2 short stacks limp, I might over-limp those guys instead of ISOing them because I realize that my tools, my stack sizes are taken away from me. In the sense that, if I raise it up and they call, if they hit the flop, they might just check raise all in. I'm not going to have multiple barrels to obviously, make a move on. Now, if you do choose to ISO a short stack, again, it's just a spot where, let's say that short stack's playing bad and he's got a pot size, like let's say you open to like 40 and It went call on a guy with say a guy with or let's say a guy with $160 stack calls you, something like that. And maybe another guy calls behind. And then the board comes out where you miss, and maybe say like it's an average C-bet board. Yeah, I'm going to tend not to C-bet that type of board into the short stacker because I think that the short stacker might, it's easily going to, you don't have any ability to fire multiple barrels. And that's a spot where I think that you could sometimes delayed C-bet the short stacker, because a lot of times if the short stacker hits any piece of it and it's checked to them, they're just going to push it in. And if a guy's calling a $40 raise with a $160 stack, he's going to be bad. But for the most part, he's not checking back middle pair there. He's going to protect. So I think you can actually get a lot of information by delayed C-betting a short stacker in or out of position as well. Same thing for in position, same thing for out of position, because if he hits middle pair and you check back that flop, he's just going to shove in on the turn. Or if you check to him on the flop and he's got middle pair, he's going to shove in on the flop. Same thing with top pair. So, and they're also going to get it in a lot lighter. You're going to face an all in if they're going to just go with it with middle pair, unlike if they had a deeper stack. So I definitely think that the delayed C-betting should be a part of your overall game plan when dealing post-flop with short stackers that have less than, say, 1 or 2 pot size bets left. But again, the most important thing is to I realize and identify the types of players that have limped, and also post-flop identify that you're up against short stacks. Because I've definitely made some mistakes where I have totally lost track of the stack sizes of my opponents, and I've just fired thinking that, the guy's got a normal stack, and all of a sudden he's got 1 or 2 pot size bets left, and, he shoves in there with king 8 suited on a 10-8 deuce board, something like that. Something where if he had a deeper stack, he might call once, but he's probably not going to call multiple barrels. But because he's on a short stack, again, he just gets it in. And again, if I had checked there, he would probably just shove in and I could just fold. So, yeah, definitely a a thing to watch when you're trying to C-bet a short stack. Now, going along here with Dan D's email, he says, I listened to an old podcast with Improva. He mentioned changing your C-bet amounts based on your position, but didn't really go about it further. Do you change your C-bet amounts based upon your position? That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought of all that much. Do I change my C-bet amounts based upon my position? Again, I will say, boy, I almost would say as a default, I would say no. I mean, I don't. Everything depends in poker, and I think that probably if you're in late position, you can make your C-bets a little bit less. But if people are basically always checking to the pre-flop raiser, the check from up front doesn't really mean anything, in the sense that if you were in early or middle position, if you were going to make a small C-bet from up back, it doesn't really make any difference that you're up front, because the guys checking to you from up front, if you're in late position, means nothing. If you know what I mean, the check is automatic. But one of the things that I definitely differ from some of the younger players that come from online games is I definitely tend to C-bet more than some guys coming from online, even on dry boards. And what I mean is that, I might see a guy bump it up to 35, and then the board comes out king 7-3 dry, and they bet 40 as a C-bet in position, where I probably would never bet less than 60 or 65. And again, the reason why I don't make that $30 or $40 bet is, and I think that the reason why those guys are doing is because maybe they intend to fire multiple barrels, maybe they don't. It's a big mistake for them to bet 30 and them not have a king, and then just decide, oh, well, the guy called my $35 bet, he must have a king, I'm going to check it down. Obviously, we talk about how that's a big leak in live poker, not double barreling enough. That would be a mistake. And I also don't like the game plan of betting small on the flop to get a call so that I can make more money to fire bigger barrels on turn and on river. Again, because the guy's not going to fold top pair anyways. And yeah, you might get him to fold a 7, but the style that I play is I like to get them off of those hands early. I don't want them to get emotionally involved in the pot early on, because I truly feel that they become married to their hand the more money they put in the pot. So you basically almost never see me making C-bets of under half pot size, unless obviously like I'm in a tournament. But with deeper stacks in a cash game, for those reasons, I think the minimum C-bet that I make is probably half pot. I don't buy into the 35 into 115 on a A7-3, rainbow board. So, that's kind of, where, where I go with that. Probably you tend to probably bet a little bit more from out of position, just because it looks a little bit, I think it looks a little bit stronger. If you were going to C-bet as a bluff on a good textured board into 3 people, you might bet a tad more than normal if you were to C-bet from out back. But besides that, I don't know if it generally changes all that much from in or out of position, at least for me. But again, I mean, I would love your feedback. So if anyone has some comments on that, you can email me in at deuceplays@deucescrack.com. I'm going to go over a hand here that I played. So I hope that gives you a little clue into the way that I think of c-betting. I'm going to go over a hand here that I played that was kind of tricky. And this went down a couple days ago at a 5-10 game against a short stack. And again, I sympathize with all you guys that play in these games with like $5 blinds and capped buy-ins, because, boy, you can really, really get into some awkward stack sizes here. Now, this guy was playing 500 deep in a 5-10 game, and it was a straddled pot. So, I mean, we're talking like super, super shallow. I mean, if you considered it 5, 10, 20 and the guy's playing 500, he's 25 big blinds deep, and it's, you get into some really, really, really weird scenarios. And I opened it under the gun to 70, so it's 5, 10, 20, and I made it 70 in the straddle with pocket kings. And this guy was kind of a nit, but he had been losing a lot in this particular day. He called. So he's got about 430 left, and everybody else folds. So the pot's about like 180 or something like that. The board comes out king, queen, jack with 2 clubs. So I flop top set. King, queen, jack with 2 clubs. I bet out 100 into 180. And he calls. So now the pot's like 375 with the rake, 375, 380. And he's got about 330 left. So he's got about a pot size bet left. The turn is the 10 of spades. So the board is king of clubs, queen of clubs, jack of diamonds, 10 of spades. He's got about a pot size bet left. Now, what is my play here? And I think that I might have made a mistake. What do you do? And again, these are spots that you guys at the $5 blind game probably get into a lot. On weird boards where all of a sudden it's a 4-liner and you have a set and the guy's got a pot size bet left. Do you shove? I mean, can you possibly get called by worse? In the sense that, well, you've got 3 kings. So if he has ace queen, he's got a straight. If he has ace jack, if he has a straight. Is it more likely that he's got queen 10 or jack 10? I would think that it's probably more likely that he has queen 10 or jack 10, which is a pair in a straight draw. So would he call if I shoved with basically middle bottom 2 pair? The other thing that you have to take into consideration is if he is on a flush draw, do I need to, necessarily protect my equity in the pot? What if he's got 10x of clubs, a hand that he would call with, something like that, jack x of clubs? If he has a 9, he beats me. I don't really know what the right answer is here. I mean, I'm pretty good at, trying to figure out what the optimal play is in terms of, in terms of hands. I ended up checking here, and I think I was trying to go for a read. Because I think that when I check, all 2-pair type hands like queen 10, queen 10, jack 10, things like that, queen jack, might just check it back because they're going to be scared that I have an ace. And, because I've got the kings in my hand, there's only 7 clubs that basically can roll off here that's going to give him the win, the unpaired clubs. So I might consider checking here with the intention of check folding, getting a read here on the turn and saying, you know what, I don't think this guy is shoving with worse. He might not even shove a 9 here if he's a tight player. If he shoves, he always is going to have an ace. So if I check and he shoves, I can just fold. If it goes check, check, I can even get some thin river value. And that's exactly what happened. It went check, check. The river was a 5 of spades. I bet out basically 180. So I bet half of the pot, maybe a little less than half of his stack. And he thought about it for a while. And he called with pocket 10s. So he had, he flopped open-ended and turned a set. Now, would he have called if I had shoved the turn? The way that he probably maybe was tilting at the time, kind of a quiet tilt, he probably would have called. The guy is a bit of a station. But I think that my line is okay as long as I don't necessarily get bluffed off of the turn. And again, I did pick up some value from the hand. And even though he ended up having probably the one hand that I was ahead of that he might have called on the turn, I'm not sure if I shove there, if he calls with clubs, or if he calls with, queen, jack, queen 10, jack 10, anything like that. And he may even call with a 9. I don't know. You could make a case where I could get better to fold, like I get a 9 to fold. I'm not really sure how he would have a 9 in his hand. Because I remember the board is king, queen, jack. I've got 3 kings, so what 9 does he have where he called under the gun +1 if he's a tight player? What 9 did he have that didn't flop a straight? And this is where people they don't understand. This is really where you need to take your hand reading ability to the next level. Because I get emails all the time and they're like, well, what if he's got a 9? And I'm like, well, how does he have a 9? You've got to go back to the beginning of the hand and recognize his range of calling your $70 straddle raise under the gun +1 when he's starting with a $500 stack, and also the blockers that you have in your hand. Like, he can't really have king 9. I mean, that might be the only hand that he could possibly show up here with a 9 as king 9 suited. And there's only one combination of that. And if he's a tight player, which this guy was, even though he was tilting, he probably doesn't even make that call with king 9 suited in that particular spot. So unless he flopped a joint like 9-10, there's just no way he can have a 9 in his hand here. So that's basically out the door. Ace queen and ace jack possibly, ace queen more likely, a couple combinations of ace king. But it really, 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 gets into an awkward spot there, with these specific stack sizes. I'm going to get to one last hand here for this particular week, and this comes an email from Matt. Thank you for the email, Matt. And he says, this is a 1-2 game at a local casino. 4 players limp in from the field, and I'm in the small blind with king of hearts, 5 of hearts, so I complete. And the flop comes around queen 9-5 rainbow. Excuse me, queen 9-9 rainbow. Queen of spades, 9 of hearts, 9 of diamonds. Queen 9-9 rainbow. And the pot is about $10. I check, and so does everyone behind me. Okay, so obviously we've just given up on this pot. Turn is the 6 of hearts. So now we pick up the king high flush draw. Queen 9-9 6. 9 of hearts, 6 of hearts. I lead for 8. 2 players fold. Then a middle position limper raises to 20 without much hesitation. Everyone else folds. The guy who raised me was probably in his 40s, and he hadn't seemed very active at all. I call, knowing that he probably has a 9, or perhaps he is already full. But I figure that if I make a flush, I can get value from a 9 on the river and check fold any non-heart rivers. The river is the jack of hearts, making the board queen 9-9 6 jack with the 9 of hearts, 6 of hearts, jack of hearts. Queen 9-9 6 of hearts, jack of hearts. I lead for 25. and he takes very little time before making it 100. I almost instantly muck, knowing that this guy has basically no bluffs in his range. Sure enough, he turns over sixes for sixes full. Matt. And Matt didn't say if he called or not, but it is an insta fold. And the question basically that Matt has is, should he be calling for flush draws on paired boards, or should he make this call on the turn in this particular scenario? And my answer in the broad terms is I don't have a problem making this call on the turn. For the reasons that Matt kind of stated in the email. And I think a lot of people say, well, I'm not going to go for flush draws on paired boards because I don't know if it's good if it hits. Now, that's true. But if you're a good enough player to make your draw and be able to bet fold the river, I don't really see much of a problem with it. Because I think the players that say, well, I'm not going to go for draws on paired boards, what they're thinking is that, they're the types of players that will make their draw and then just check because they're not comfortable, betting because they might be beat. And it's just human nature for these recreational players that they can just never fold to a raise. They can't bet fold. There's just no way that they can bet fold. Now, Matt didn't mention the stack sizes here, but let's talk about how much money his opponent would have to have for us to make this call. So the pot was 10. It got checked through on the turn. He led for 8, and the guy made it 20. So 18, 38, 12. We're calling 12 to win a pot of 38. So right now we're getting about 3-1. Now, the board is queen 9-9-6 with 2 hearts. Now, this is a different type of board here. One of the hearts that gives you the reverse implied odds is relatively easy to spot. Because we talk about when you're going for flush draws and you think that a guy has trips, right? Well, then it's going to be, a situation where 2 of the heart outs are going to be reverse implied odds outs, meaning that you're going to make your flush and it's going to fill them up if they're not already full, but it's going to fill them up. And then, 7 of your heart outs are good. Or in this particular case, you're drawing dead anyways. But that's going to be rare. But can you see the difference between a board of queen of spades, 9 of hearts, 9 of diamonds, and a board of queen of hearts, 9 of hearts, 9 of diamonds, and then the turn being like an offsuit heart and having a flush draw? And what I mean by that is, in this particular scenario, the queen is not a heart. The board is queen of spades, 9 of hearts, 9 of diamonds, 6 of hearts. So if we think that the guy is raising the turn here with a 9 when we pick up a flush draw, the queen of hearts on the river is basically going to make an obvious full house. It's going to be double paired. So that's one of the heart outs that is no good for us, a board pairing heart out that's actually obvious. So there's only one hidden heart out that would give us a reverse implied odds situation, unless, of course, he's already full with queen 9 or 6 is full. You see that, right? It's a little bit complicated. Queen 9-9-6. Queen of spades is 9 of hearts, 9 of diamonds, 6 of hearts. So let's say this guy had ace 9 or 9-8. So if he had ace 9, there would only be one card that would be hidden that would give us reverse. That would be ace. 9-8, one card. That would be an 8. Because the queen will make the board double paired. And that is a different scenario than if the board is queen of hearts, 9 of hearts, 9 of diamonds, and let's say the turn's a 6 of clubs and it got checked through on the flop, and then we let out. Now, because the queen and the 9 are both hearts, now we have 2 cards, 2 hearts that are basically hidden, that are not going to double pair with the board, that may be reverse implied odds for us, reverse implied odds hands for us. So that's the, that's the actual, that's basically the scenario here on the double paired board. And actually, you know what? Now that I'm looking at this board here, if it was queen of hearts, 9 of hearts, 9 of diamonds, 6 of clubs, well, then the 6 of hearts then wouldn't be hidden either. So, excuse me, there's only always going to be one type of reverse implied odd type of hand on this paired board, because you're still going to get a double paired board if the 6 of hearts comes in. So it's really, you're dealing with one kicker type reverse implied odds hand, reverse implied odd card that comes on the river. So 12 into 38, so we're calling 12 for 38 here. We've got 8 outs, so we would need 4.5 to 1 to make the call, which would mean by the end of the hand, we would only need to make 54. So we would only need to make a $16 bet here on the river if all our outs were pure with no reverse implied odds. And obviously we can do that with the fact that, the guy could be full and we've got reverse implied odds. I think we need to definitely make more than that. But the key here is that when we make this call, the pot's 50. And especially at this level, if we make a heart, now Matt said he bet 25 into 50. I would just bet pot. I would bet 50 to win 50 and then just obviously bet fold, because then if the guy raises, you're beat. There's 100% you're beat. And if you bet 50 into 50, a guy might not even raise here with pocket sixes on a queen 9-9-6 jack board, being scared of like jack 9. So the only hands that you're even going to get to raise are the hands that are like queen 9. Maybe at this level a guy might raise, sixes full. But now we actually end up calling 12 to win 88 here. If we bet 50 and we get called, we're calling 12 to win 38 plus a $50 bet on the river. 12 to win 88. Getting, about over 7.5 to 1. And again, at this level, even though we never have a bluff in our range there, our hand always looks like a flush, and it's like we're playing our hand face up. A guy just cannot lay down trips at 1-2. If he's got it, he's got it. It's just trips. You know what I mean? It's just, I can't lay it down. It doesn't matter what you have, even though my hand is just a bluff catcher and it's irrelevant. Like my hand is the equivalent to ace queen here or even less. I can't fold trips. So I like to go for these peels on paired boards with flush draws, especially when I think that a lot of times a guy might not even raise the turn with a full house. This guy ended up raising the turn with sixes full, but a lot of times guys will just flat there and they'll only raise with trips. And it just means that when you're going for a draw, they have that much stronger of a hand to pay you off. I mean, it all comes back to you want them to have a big hand when you peel. And that's why sometimes, like, I might peel in a spot where I know a guy has top set and I have a gut shot. I know he has top set. Maybe something in a 3-bet pot or the action where, and I know that my 4 outs are good. And even though, with one card to come, the chances of me hitting are 10 to 1 against, if I can make 10 to 1 off of the bet size, if a guy makes a min check raise to, if I say I bet the turn and the guy makes a min check raise 100 more, and I know he has top set and we've got more than $1,100 stacks, I'm going to make that call because I know he'll never be able to fold if I hit. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode. That's going to wrap things up for us this week. Again, have a happy holidays, safe New Year's, Merry Christmas, and we will see you next time.